Okay, welcome to the fifth screencast for Chapter 2. In this screencast, we're going to use the production possibilities frontier model that we've been developing throughout Chapter 2 to talk a little bit about growth. Typically, growth is a topic that's discussed more in a macroeconomics class, but I do want to tie it in with what we've been talking about with the production possibilities frontier. All right. So the first thing we should think about is the trade-off between present and future. All right. So consumer goods are goods produced for current consumption: food, housing, clothing, entertainment. Capital goods are goods that are used to produce other valuable goods. So these are things like buildings, factories, roads, machinery, and computers. They're all used in the production of other consumer goods. And then there's investments. Investment is using resources to make new capital. All right. So the idea is that you take some of your resources today and you use them to build capital so that you can build more goods and services into the future. All right. So investing in capital gives you a greater ability to produce consumer goods for the future. Right. All right. So let's take a look at this using our production possibilities frontier. So here on the y-axis on both of these, so this is going to be our short-run production possibilities frontier, our long-run production possibilities frontier. On the y-axis, I have the quantity of capital goods that are produced, so the quantity of goods that are used to produce other goods. And then on the x-axis, I have the quantity of consumer goods produced. The same in the long run and the short run. So let's take a look here. Let's put in a production possibilities frontier. And you can either produce all things just for today and not anything that is going to be used to produce consumer goods in the future, or you could produce nothing but capital and no consumer goods for today. And this is all the different combinations of those choices that you could make in terms of what to produce: capital, which will produce consumer goods in the future, or consumer goods today. All right, so let's assume we're here at point A, all right, on this production possibilities frontier. And now let's assume that that we do, so at point A, notice we are mostly making consumption for today. Most of the goods being made are for consumption today, but also we are putting some of the resources into making capital goods for the future. All right, and notice what happens when we do that. When we invest some for the future, we get a shifted out production possibilities frontier. All right, we can produce now more consumer goods and we can produce more capital for the future. All right, so let's look at a different scenario. Short run production possibilities frontier, long run production possibilities frontier. Now let's make a choice to produce a lot more than in the last graph, capital goods here. All right, so we dialed back. Remember, point A was about right here. This was our A. So we've dialed back the consumer goods that we've produced. So we were producing here. So we've dialed that back, and before at point A, we were only putting that much into producing capital goods. So we've dialed up the quantity of capital goods. We've dialed down the quantity of consumer goods for today. Let's see what happens to the future. All right. Notice we're going to get a much, much larger shift in the production possibilities frontier. So the amount of resources being used to create capital today can directly influence the growth rate of the economy, right? So notice this is growth in the production possibilities model. All right. This shift out, meaning we can now produce more capital goods for the future and a lot more consumer goods for today. All right. So over the last 20 years, China and India have invested a lot in capital compared to the United States. What's the result? Well, China is sacrificing consumption today for a better future, right? They don't, if you put resources toward capital, those resources aren't being used toward consumption today. So China and India have very, very high growth rates, but another trade-off is that Chinese workers have less leisure time than Americans do. All right. Part of this is a catching up of sorts. So these are were until recently developing countries. And so they're really trying to grow as fast as possible, because over the long run, to get to standards of living that the United States and Western Europe have, you have to grow and get up that curve so that you can then have the amount of consumer goods that more developed countries have. All right. So just to kind of conclude on what we've talked about all through these Chapter 2 screencasts, economists use simplified models to understand how the economy works. And those models should be thought of as maps. They are designed for a certain purpose, and we judge those models just like we would judge a map according to how useful it is for the purpose for which it was designed. All right. We introduced our first model, the production possibilities frontier, and it showed us, first of all the combinations of two goods that a person could produce. And we also used it to illustrate gains from trade between two people. We also looked at opportunity cost, and we looked at in detail the idea of comparative advantage, whoever has the lower opportunity cost. So we found that when producers specialize, they focus their effort on the goods and services that they have comparative advantage in, and then they trade. And by trading, they ended up outside of their old production possibilities frontier. They ended up able to consume at a level that was higher than they would have been able to consume before. All right, so that's it for Chapter 2.